Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Student Spotlight series, where we showcase some of the work our past students have done. Today, it is our pleasure to have with us Emerson Chang. Emerson, can you tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, what year of school you're in, and what course you took with CCIR?
Hi, my name is Emerson, and I'm a high school student from California. I'm currently a junior in high school, and I took the one-on-one research mentorship at CCIR.
So, who was your mentor, and what topic did you research together?
My mentor was Dr. Marwa Mahmood, and we looked at moral language in art critique journals and how that changed across the time period.
Okay, that sounds super interesting. How did you become interested in that topic of research?
I think I was interested in that topic by one of my previous research experiences. So I attended the UC Santa Barbara Summer Research Academies, and I got to learn about computational methods for evaluating moral language in text. But I noticed that a lot of the research in this area was very like political or like looking at political speeches or social media posts. So at CCR, I wanted to take what I learned there and apply it to art history, which is like another field that I'm interested in.
Mhm. So, how did you sort of develop the topic with your mentor and sort of create a plan for writing your paper?
I think in the beginning we had to like read a lot of papers, and then my mentor and I discussed them and like looked at their methodologies and talked about how they could be applied in my own paper.
Mhm. So can you be a little bit more specific? What kind of secondary literature were you reading? And I guess what were you adopting from them and what were you sort of doing that was new?
Well, there was one paper in particular where they had like eight art critique journals and they took a bunch of articles from 1960 to 2015 and then they performed sentiment analysis on it and evaluated the changes over time. And I wanted to do something similar to that paper, so I used mostly the same data set based on what I could access. And then I also like kind of presented my graphs in a similar way with like the changes across time.
Mm-hmm. So what part was new, or where were you sort of kind of advancing? I guess advancing the field or doing going further than the existing literature.
Well, they did like sentiment analysis while I did like moral foundations analysis. So I used a model called MoralBERT and it produced predictive probabilities for 10 of the moral foundations.
So can you say a little bit more about what you mean by moral foundations and I guess how this model works?
Yeah, so there's like something called the moral foundations theory, and it pretty much outlines like the first draft of our moral mind. So they have a bunch of like virtue and vice pairs. So those are like care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, sanctity, degradation, and I think there's one more, but I forgot. But pretty much the model was trained on a bunch of human annotations of social media posts from like prominent social media platforms to be able to extract like those moral foundations.
I see. So you were looking for, I guess, language that was indicative of, I guess, these sort of virtue vice pairs in art
Yeah.
criticism. Yeah. So what did you find?
We found that the predicted probabilities for the care and the degradation foundations increased across the time period, while the predicted probabilities for the purity foundation decreased. But overall, there wasn't really a lot of moral language in our data set.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So was that, did that surprise you or was that according to your expectations or?
It kind of surprised me because I thought there would be more moral language.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What made you think that?
Um, I guess like usually when people talk about art it has like very powerful messages and also like it can elicit strong reactions that people can put into writing. So I was kind of surprised when the moral foundations were like very low.
Hmm. So I guess what do you feel like the next step is, or having discovered this surprising fact, where would you want to take your research if you were going to continue the project?
Um, I guess if I wanted to continue the project, um, I think maybe I'd work on fine-tuning the model for like art critique articles rather than just like social media posts, since those are like two different kinds of texts.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I guess without seeing the data set, it does seem surprising that there would be very little moral language and or I guess I don't read a lot of art criticism, so who can say? I think on the one hand, in certain fields of criticism, there's a pretense to objectivity that makes people wary of using moral language, right? Because then that makes it seem as if you're not sort of a disinterested critic. So maybe there's like a credibility thing there. But then on the other hand, I think it also seems possible that the model might not be trained on the type of language that like the type of moral language that might appear in art criticism.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that you read articles from the data set yourself, right?
Yeah, a couple of them.
Did you identify moral language through your own reading?
Yeah, I did. Like, I read one of them where they talked about like an art piece made of like all this like trash from cities
Hmm.
and how it was like taking in the waste from like urban life. So I thought that could be like indicative of like the degradation foundation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, did you check the results of the model? Did you find places where the model identified moral language where you didn't see moral language, or did you find places where you saw moral language but it didn't seem like the model identified it?
No, I didn't do that because I had like 5,000 articles in my data set, so it would have been like kind of difficult to like go through all of them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't mean that you would need to read every article, but it's an interesting result. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so I guess this isn't really a question that's directly this isn't really a question that's directly pertinent to your research, but I think it's an interesting question that is sort of it's an interesting question that I think the research project kind of presupposes in a way. Do you think that art has moral value, or that when we criticize or otherwise sort of try to evaluate art, we should evaluate it in moral terms?
I do think that art has moral value because I feel like a lot of the art that you look at, the artist is always like trying to say something about like maybe like an issue in society. Um, and also I think the purpose of making art in a way is to like try to get your audience to feel a certain way. So I think that when we look at art, we should also be paying attention to like the moral value of it.
Hmm. And I guess, do you feel like the moral significance of art has changed over time?
Um, Actually, this was something I was kind of thinking about in like my paper. So like I think like looking to some of our earlier art, it was like very like religious, but
Mhm.
now in like looking at modern art, it's kind of like I guess different from that. So that was one of the things I talked about in my discussion section that maybe since we're not talking about the religious narratives in art as much,
Mhm.
there's not as much of the purity foundation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds. Are you familiar? There's a very famous art piece that caused a lot of controversy in the United States called "Piss Christ." Have you heard of this?
No.
Basically, I believe this was in the 70s. I'd have to check. But basically, an artist who was receiving a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, I believe, or some other type of federal funding for the arts, put out a piece of art that was basically a crucifix. It was a photograph of a crucifix immersed in like a jar of urine.
Mm,
So basically, people were outraged by this. That this art, which the public thought was in a way morally reprehensible. It was literally sacrilege, right?
Yeah.
Was being funded by the government. And there was a whole large controversy over basically whether public funding for the arts has a kind of responsibility to only fund morally edifying art. Uh,
Oh, that's interesting.
so it's very much in the like something that's in the vein of the kinds of questions that you're asking here. Because I think it is a public debate, like especially when government funding is involved. You know, what kind of art should we as a society sort of collectively support, right? And I think that in general, the idea that art should be morally edifying probably has become less popular over time, or at least that it seems like a lot of modern art is like a lot of modern art is critical of society, right?
Yeah.
And whereas I think that, and that's not to say that, I mean, throughout history, one of the great, I think, functions of art has been to offer criticism. But at the same time, I think that in a sort of more and more skeptical world, art that sort of celebrates or sanctifies uh, things as they are maybe seems less popular.
Yeah, I agree.
So, how did you approach writing your paper? Since you got, it seems like kind of almost a null result.
Um, I think how I structured my paper was based off of that one sentiment analysis study that I mentioned earlier, where I kind of took note of like the trends across time and then made graphs of like all the changes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But as far as like the written portion or your sort of written analysis, what did you?
Um,
Yeah,
I think like oh like in my results section.
yeah.
Um, I guess like I mentioned like the percent changes from like one year to the next and then um also I created like these probability density graphs which are like showing how likely it is to find like a score in like a certain range. And I talked about how it was more likely to find like scores in like a very low range, which like pointed to like how there was very limited moral language in the art criticism journals.
Okay. So then, I guess what's your own opinion then about what function art should serve morally?
Um, I feel like there's no right or wrong art, but I think that art should be like provocative in a way and get you to think about something that you hadn't really thought about before.
Hmm.
So kind of like what you were talking about earlier about that the Piss Christ art piece, like maybe it's not like conventionally right in terms of like morality, but it gets you to consider like mm, something broader in society.
Hmm. So art should have I guess art should have a kind of intellectual function. Then art should make you think. Is that okay? So what about the educative sort of function of art? Like art, I think that another sort of common source of controversy is whether, or a question that probably critics don't ask this question, but a question that the general public will ask about works of art is, are they appropriate for children? Right? So if
Yeah.
you're looking for a sort of moral language and how people talk about art, that's probably one place to look. Um, some works of art we think are appropriate for children, and some we think are not. Uh, Presumably, we think this because we think that somehow art can teach children things or can have an impact on how they think and behave, good or bad. Um, so, do you think that artists or we as a society have any kind of responsibility in uh, kind of filtering what art is available to children?
Um, I haven't really thought about that before, but mm, I guess yes, we probably should because um like children are very like influenced by like the environment and like what they see. But then I guess that makes me wonder like what we would want them to see or like what we think is like right for a child to see. So I probably have
Yeah.
to look into it more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's precisely the interesting question. Like, it seems like, sort of on the face of it, people will generally agree that, well, probably children shouldn't be allowed to see everything, but what should they be able to see? What should children learn, and what role does media or art play in educating children?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder also if you can extend that. If there are things that are there, it's that we could agree would be bad for children to see. Is there any reason why we shouldn't say that there might also be things that are bad for adults to see?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that'd be interesting to explore in like maybe another project.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's like, are you familiar with Plato's Republic?
No.
So in this, it's a, foundational work in Western philosophy. In this book, Plato, it's a dialogue in which Socrates converses with, some other Athenians about what justice is. And in order to find out what justice is, they propose to imagine what a just society would look like. And in by looking at the just society, we can understand better what justice is. And it's complicated. We don't need to get into it, but the part that I wanted to point to is that famously Plato says, "Okay, we're going to found a just city. The first thing we need to do is kick out all the poets. No artists allowed in the good city, because art is almost always subversive. Basically, is his view. So if you in a bad society, art is good because society, this art because art serves an important critical function often. But in a good society, if we presume that we have a good society, art is bad. We need to get rid of it because art is going to cause people to question the laws and question the moral values that act as the foundation of our just society.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes art is used to like reinforce the majority opinion. So,
Yeah, basically, he says that that's the only legitimate function of art in a good society. It's to embellish or otherwise endow the goodness of what we already have. So
mhm.
there's strict censorship, basically, in Plato's uh, in the Republic, and of course, I think that you can't take it too literally, but this is sort of a common sort of theme in more civic-minded philosophers, like Rousseau in The Social Contract. Same thing. He sort of outlines what he thinks a just society would be, and one of the preconditions for the just society is strict censorship. Um, and you see this in a lot of other philosophers too. The idea that art is uh, the subversive sort of character of art is something that needs to be strictly controlled if you're going to have a just society. So
Yeah.
clearly, a lot of thinkers in the Western tradition take the idea of the moral value of art extremely seriously. Um, yeah, like art clearly has a deep impact on how people think and act, at least in their view. So so I think that their view would be that if one can't talk about art in a serious way without talking about its moral sort of character.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah. Another big historical sort of fight about art is the Protestant Reformation. One of the complaints of the Protestants against the Catholics was that the Catholic love of beautiful buildings, beautiful paintings, statuary, and etc. is idolatry. That precisely because the Catholics were so interested in art, the art that would fill the churches distracted people from contemplation of the divine.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, like in my art history class, we recently learned about an art piece um that was like sharing the Protestant point of view and how like um I think the Protestants thought that you didn't necessarily need to like donate all this money to the church to like fund their projects to like get into heaven, but like you just needed to be like faithful.
Hmm.
So I forget the name of the piece, but like it was pretty much like a print, so it was like pretty widely disseminated,
Mhm.
and um it pretty much criticized the Catholic point of view while showing how the Protestants were like just like trying to get people to endorse the Protestants more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely that kind of thing. I mean, you do see like like I think some Protestant communities pretty much banned religious art completely. I think this was true of the Puritans, and it might have also been true of the Calvinists in Geneva. But you do see some Protestant art that's very simple, and a lot of it is things like woodblock prints that are reproducible.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the idea being again that the ornate sort of buildings and paintings and statues and frescoes, etc., of the Catholic Church don't make people. I basically these are things that, on the one hand, extract money from the parishioners without justification, and on the other hand, distract people from I guess a genuine relationship with God or contemplation of God. You're not thinking about God; you're just looking at a pretty statue.
Mhm.
If you're in a Catholic church, um, so I guess we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I guess I mean to say that I think that the fundamental idea here that we should track how our sort of moral judgments about art have changed over time is super interesting.
Mm.
And I really do wonder if maybe it might just be a matter of the model not being trained in a way that allows it to recognize that language in art criticism, since, of course, the language people use in art criticism is very different from the language people use on social media. Uh,
Yeah, definitely.
so I think there's real potential there, and it might be worth trying again or trying a similar project in the future. Having said that, so do you have any plans to publish your paper or take it to any conferences?
Um, yeah, I'm interested in publishing my paper, and right now I've been like looking at the Journal of Emerging Investigators.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about your experience overall? Did you feel like you were well supported during the writing process? Were there things that was there anything that you found especially difficult, or anything
Um,
that maybe wasn't as hard as it seemed?
I guess one thing I felt difficult was just like parsing through all the academic literature, but my mentor helped me out with that because we kind of discussed the literature during our sessions.
Mhm.
Mm. And then I guess my mentor also helped me with like writing my actual paper. Like we had two sessions where she just like read through it and gave me advice. Like she noticed that my discussion section was like she thought I was like referencing other people too much and I should focus more on like sharing my own interpretation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think that a lot of people sort of struggle with that when they first start writing. I guess doing academic work. I know that I like often felt in the past like I need to cite some kind of source for every single thing I was saying because I didn't feel as if I had the authority to sort of just think for myself. And it's definitely a sort of a crutch or a bad habit that you need to kick. So that's good advice. Is there anything that you wish you'd known earlier before starting the program?
Um, I guess maybe I should have expected like that I would have to read that much. Because it definitely took a lot of time just going through all the literature.
Mhm. And is there any advice maybe that you would give someone who is going to do a similar program?
Probably not being afraid to like ask your mentor for help, like just like speaking up during your sessions if you have something you're like unclear about, or like emailing them if you're having trouble maybe with like debugging your code or anything like that.
Mhm. Yeah, they're definitely there to be a resource for you. So you should take advantage of it as much as possible. I think it's true in college too. A lot of students, I think, don't talk to their professors enough. Do you have any other thoughts about your experience? Do you feel, I guess, after having done this, inspired to do research in the future, or confident that you can continue to do independent research going forward?
I think I'm interested in doing research in college, like maybe something in the same field, like exploring the moral value of art.
Mhm. That's great. And do you have any other final thoughts that you'd like to share about your experience?
I'm just really grateful for my mentor for all the help that she provided throughout my project.
Yeah, I'm glad that it was positive, and I really do think it's a super interesting project. I mean, I really do wonder if maybe you ran into some of the limitations of the model you were using, because like just again, I don't read a lot of art criticism, so I can't say in advance, but it seems like something very important. It's clear to me that if you look at the whole tradition of Western thought, how we think about art has changed radically, and it would be, I think it's interesting and important to sort of try to track that in a rigorous way. And I really do think that this is an idea worth returning to and doing more work on. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with you about it, and thank you for sharing about your experience.
Yeah. Thank you.